This is when I started to panic. I instantly knew that I was in another dimension. I started crying. I wanted to go home. I had accepted that this was my new reality. There is no comfort, no laying down, no sleeping, no eating. It is you trying to relax, but you can't. Every time it feels like you can finally just rest and accept the situation, you find yourself feeling worse and worse. I started off at around 10 p.m. with a weighed-out 35-milligram dose in the vape. I was sitting in my living room and the trip went well enough. I had my eyes closed and I got those colourful fractals, but the main thing I felt during that trip was another entity in the room with me. It was trying to tell me something, maybe a warning about something, but I couldn't understand it. I came back and decided I needed to know what that message was. I waited a half hour and threw in roughly 45 to 50 milligrams more into the vape. This time, I laid in bed with just a dim Himalayan lamp in the corner. I took off again, and I went back to that same place as before. The fractals and the feeling of there being another entity in the room. I could feel and understand those same entities giving me a message. They were telling me to stop doing something. I still didn't know what the warning was. I remember the sensation of being in handcuffs. It was as if the spirits were giving me a stern warning. After I came down from that, I still felt like I was missing something. I still wanted to know what they were trying to tell me. In retrospect, I wish I had the insight to realize that this wasn't the time, and I should sit on what I had experienced. I then made the foolish decision to try one more time and see what I could get out of it. I waited another 45 minutes to an hour and packed the vape again. This time, I decided I wanted to try and do a much larger dose than I ever had before. I thought that would be enough to give me the right message. I packed the vape's chamber with roughly 120 to 140 milligrams of fluffy white DMT crystals. I laid down in bed again and took off. It was hard to get it all down, but I managed to inhale everything in one hit. Within 15 seconds, all of a sudden everything went dark, and there was this brown matter pushing all around me. I felt a cold wind and a lot of negative energy. I was seeing this brown stuff shooting around the room with pieces of black in it. The best way I can describe it is like a mixture of thick, dark brown mud being shoved around the room. The black pieces looked like pieces of plastic. It was all moving so fast, and I had no idea what was going on. This is when everything went black. The brown stuff went away, and it was silent and black for a brief amount of time. Then I felt like my body was being physically pushed into a fetal position. I started seeing and feeling these matte black rods pushing against every inch of my body. This is when I started to panic. I instantly knew that I was in another dimension. I started crying. I wanted to go home. I wanted to scream out for help, but the only sound I could make was this deep, guttural groaning sound. All I knew was that I wanted to go back to Earth. I started just kicking my arms and legs back and forth. I couldn't see my body, but I could feel it. I could feel those plastic rods and boxes pushing against my body with an incredible amount of pressure. I was kicking and groaning, and I realized that this was hell. I felt as though I had managed to do so much DMT that I was removed from Earth and dumped into another dimension that I would never get out of. I was pulling at my clothes and could feel this silky material around me that I started trying to rip up. I kept pulling, and it kept coming down around me. This was when I started to have a modicum of acceptance of the situation. I messed up, and now I would need to pay the price. I had essentially given up. I just wanted to rest, to lay down and have my soul die. I couldn't do this for eternity. I longed for comfort. I decided to lay down and stop fighting, but I couldn't. When I laid down, it was as if those plastic shapes were not only pushing against me, but also falling. It was as if the ground wasn't there, and every time I tried to put my head down, the plastic rods gave way to keep falling. All I could do was keep kicking. Kicking back and forth, trying to get out of that fetal position, and dry heaving was all I could manage. All I wanted was to get comfortable, and I just kept falling through this dark space. I started to really panic, and was overcome with sadness. I had accepted that this was my new reality, but I wanted to know what had happened to the real world. Was my dog going to be taken care of? What would my parents think? Was my body still in my bedroom, or did I just vanish into this other dimension? Is the world even there anymore? I truly believed that I had pushed myself into a dimension that we were never supposed to see. I then felt this hell I was in, morphing. I started to get a vague sense of my room. Although I could sense where I was, everything was still breaking apart, and I thought that this was hell trying to trick me. The room was dark, and those rods were coming out of the walls. I pushed myself out of the bedroom and walked into the living room. I tried to touch the couch and the wall, but when I did, they broke apart into those plastic rods. My dog was in the corner scared, but she wasn't my dog anymore. She was a terrifying goblin shape. I decided I had to see what was outside and see how far I could venture into my new and permanent reality. Even though I felt it was all an illusion, I was so hot in my house and wanted to see what else this hell would put in my way. Maybe I felt like I could still escape this dimension. Somehow I grabbed my house keys, out of habit probably, and I walked out into the street. Nothing felt real. Everything I looked at seemed to be breaking apart. I started walking up to parked cars and trying to touch them to see if they were real. They didn't look like normal cars. They were some sort of futuristic vehicle, and they all had a menacing look. I was now completely convinced that this hellscape was trying to trick me into thinking I was still alive. I could feel the entity that put me here watching me and laughing at my futile attempts to escape. I walked down my street over to the main road. There were people walking, but when I would walk up to them, most just walked right by me. I then stopped to ask some people for help, and everyone just kept going. I went up to one couple and said hello, and they said hi and kept walking like everything was fine. I ran up to cars trying to get people to help. The cars were racing by me, and they all looked so much scarier with the lights on. I knew that I was dead, and this whole thing, being in the street and outside, was an illusion, but I felt the dire need for someone to help me. I was screaming help me over and over again. I went up to one guy sitting in his car asking him for help, and he looked at me like I was nuts and shut his window. I don't know if I could even call him a guy. He or it looked like a goblin similar to what my dog looked like. I was dripping sweat at this point, and all I wanted was to sit in a car with the air conditioning and try to get comfortable, considering this was going to be my existence for the rest of eternity. I felt that same need for comfort as I did when I was trying to lie down in my house. He of course drove away, and I then ran into the middle of the street trying to flag down cars. All the cars were zipping by me. Nobody wanted to stop. I started walking back to my house, but I decided that it wasn't actually there, so I stopped. I tried to lay down and everything turned into those plastic rods, and I couldn't get comfortable. I eventually decided that I needed the police. I don't know why, but I thought that since this hell was giving me the illusion that I was in the street and still on Earth, then maybe I could get taken to a hospital and just settle in there. Maybe they would give me some Xanax or opiates to calm me down. Even if this wasn't real life, I felt like maybe I could take advantage of the situation and try and get some drugs. I had resigned myself to the fact that I wasn't coming back to my real life and just wanted to get comfortable. I needed someone to call them for me, but all of a sudden nobody was there. I stood in the street trying to stop someone, and people were going around me. I ended up jumping on the hood of the next guy who was moving slowly enough. I laid down with my forehead against this guy's windshield. There was a foreign guy in the car who barely spoke English and was confused and terrified. I was yelling for him to call the police, which he was doing. I wanted him to open the door and let me sit down, but I felt that if I got off the car, he would drive away like everyone else. Then I noticed two guys walking in the street who were asking if I was okay. I kept telling them I needed the police, and they said okay, and that they were on the way. They then tried to keep asking me what was going on, and I could hear some lady in the background saying, "He's been calling for help for a while. The cops are on the way." This was when I realized that I was back on Earth. I had been put back here for some reason. I jumped off this guy's car and ran away from all the people trying to help me. I sprinted back to my house and went inside. When I got inside, I found my room completely destroyed. All the sheets had been ripped off and the carpet was turned over. My nightstand was completely on its side as well. I realized that those silky materials that I felt were part of the hell were my sheets and blanket. As I returned to reality, I called a good friend who helped calm me down. I had to turn on all my lights and I burned some sage to try and expel those spirits. What I believe to have learned from this situation is that hell is very real and very uncomfortable. It is a never-ending cycle of wanting to escape, but never ever being able to. There is no comfort, no laying down, no sleeping, no eating. It is you trying to relax, but you can't. Every time it feels like you can finally just rest and accept the situation, you find yourself feeling worse and worse. I am terrified of going back to this place. This was my message to stop being selfish, stop trying to control things, and stop focusing on money. I need to start focusing on helping others and getting closer to God. I do not want to end up in hell, and this experience was just a sample of what it will be like. I always thought of death as being either heaven or just nothingness. I know now with 100% certainty that there is a hell, and it is as unforgiving of a place as you could imagine.